As gaming has continued to grow over the last few decades, a disturbing trend has been occurring. The once great giants of the gaming world seem to be releasing more and more consistently disappointing games. Trend chasing, games with little innovation, devious microtransaction and loot box schemes, lazy remakes and remasters, unfinished and buggy messes which need a year or more to reach an actual game. It seems like a huge chunk of AAA titles nowadays just lack the vision and heart which made early gaming so great. And yet, in all this darkness, there's a beacon of hope that has shined bright for the last 15 years: indie gaming. Indie gaming has been around for years, but really blew up in the early 2000s with titles like Super Meat Boy and Fez, and since then, indie developers have proven to be some of the real trailblazers in the industry. Top indie developers continue to push out high-quality products, a lot of them taking interesting risks and having new, fresh ideas for the gaming world. Hey guys, James here, and today I want to talk about some indie games I think you should try. Shout out to Just a Wayland for challenging me to make this video. Keep in mind though, there are a ton of absolutely amazing indie games in the market, many of which I haven't even gotten around to yet, so if I don't talk about your favorite, it doesn't mean I don't think it's good. In fact, it's probably in my backlog or wishlist. Heck, some of these games today that I talk about might not even necessarily be the best indie games out there, or my own personal favorites, but they are without a doubt great experiences which I think seasoned gamers would enjoy. If you guys like this video, let me know and I'll definitely make more lists in the future. Limbo. Limbo is a 2D puzzle platformer with a grim and dark aesthetic. It's a game which I think shows how important atmosphere can be to a game, with a distinct minimalistic art style, as well as great sound design and a nice soundtrack. All of these make it a game that shows how artistic games can really be, and I think it's one of the best early examples of games as an art form. I would describe it less like a horror game and more like one which is creepy and can give you some anxiety at certain parts. It's simple to get into with only a few controls, and I think the puzzles are also really solid and there's a lot of good sense of progression and building in the level design. At times, the puzzles can be a bit challenging or cryptic, or maybe reliant on trial and error, but overall, I don't think the game is overly difficult. It's a tad short, but I think it does a good job of conveying an idea and vision, with an open-ended story up for your own interpretation. After you try Limbo, also consider looking at games like Inside or Little Nightmares, which clearly follow in Limbo's footsteps. Papers, Please. Papers, Please is a sort of puzzle game where you play as the guy who works at a border customs station of a Soviet-esque nation. Yeah, that definitely sounds weird, but Papers, Please does some pretty interesting things as a game. The core gameplay itself is actually fairly difficult, as the number of rules and details you need to look out for and account for can at times be pretty complicated. As the game progresses, you start facing some difficult situations and you get forced to make meaningful choices. Do you allow someone through who claims to have family on the other side but doesn't have the proper paperwork? How do you react if you meet someone who you suspect is being trafficked? How do you deal with the various shady characters who might come through the area? Not only that, but you need to consider the fact that your performance is evaluated and this affects your pay, and thus your ability to care for yourself and your own family. Papers, Please is a pretty unique game that presents interesting moral situations, so if you're into a game that challenges you in a different sort of way, definitely give this a shot. The Stanley Parable. So speaking of choice, the Stanley Parable is a game that presents one simple choice. Do you take the left door or the right door? The Stanley Parable is definitely not a game for everyone. It's a bit of a walking simulator, and there really isn't too much to do in terms of actual gameplay, but it addresses an interesting concept: the idea of choice in video games. This makes the game quite meta, and it's definitely interesting to look at if you're someone who loves to think about games and their design. It's got a great narrator and sense of humor, and I do think there are some truly memorable moments that make it an interesting adventure when compared to other walking sims. With a ton of different possible endings and results, it's a game that also rewards exploration, and I think is a game every serious gamer should experience. In fact, consider showing it to your friends as a way of seeing what they're like as gamers. The Binding of Isaac. Man, when making this list, I was presented with a true dilemma. In a world with so many, not just great, but amazing indie roguelikes, how can I choose just one to include on the list? For this video, I ended up choosing The Binding of Isaac, not because I think it's the best roguelike out there, but because it's arguably the most iconic. While Spelunky came earlier and is iconic and amazing in its own right, I would argue that a lot of the mechanics and design we see in modern roguelike games comes from Isaac. In this game, you play as Isaac, a little boy trying to avoid his murderous mother. Using the power of your tears, you fight your way through various rooms and dungeons, killing monsters, facing off against different bosses, meeting some interesting characters, and trying to obtain the best items that you can to give yourself a fighting chance against the Big Mama. But be careful. If you die, you need to start over from the beginning, all over again. Undertale. Oh, Undertale. This viral hit is truly one of the greatest indie games of all time. I think more than anything, Undertale shows how much heart can bring to a game. As you're playing it, you can't help but feel all the love that was put into it. It takes on the mold of a classic RPG adventure game following in the footsteps of games like Earthbound, but it has a unique take on combat, incorporating bullet hell elements, as well as allowing players the option to resolve conflicts without using attacks. While the graphics are a bit crude, the art is actually really endearing. The soundtrack is one of my favorites ever, the gameplay is engaging and has a lot of meta elements to it, and more than anything, the story is what separates it from other games. With tons of different secrets and routes, it's a game you can keep coming back to. I won't spoil too much as I think it's just a game you need to experience yourself. Seriously, if you haven't already, do yourself a favor and play Undertale. And that's all for this time. Let me know if you want more suggestions. There are plenty of amazing indie games to talk about, and I would love to make another video about more in the future. And of course, if you enjoyed this list, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.